The artistry of curating while Black and disabled.
Hello, 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 everyone. My name is Justice Shorter. I am a Black blind lesbian woman. I am sharing today while sick, so I am not on camera. You may also hear a couple of coughs here and there, but we as individuals with disabilities know a little something about having to work while sick. And so I thank you in advance for your grace around this. I will also not be on camera because I'm using multiple pieces of assistive technology. But some of the artwork that I'm talking about, some of the books that I'm referencing, some of the quotes that I recite, they will also come up on the screen, which I really think is the most important piece here. But you should also see a picture of me on screen, and I will also provide my website later on, should it be very important for you to match a voice with a face. But I am the founder of Seated Ground. This is a disability justice practice that produces multifaceted projects across movement spaces. I love to say that my work is wedded to building disabled dreams into fruition. Most of my work centers on issues at the intersection of disaster justice, racial justice, and disability justice issues. We live at these intersections. We don't come to visit. So I work on these issues, whether they are trendy or whether they have fallen out of favor with popular culture or mainstream media or mainstream nonprofit organizations, right? This talk, though, is an offering of the most essential pieces of me, which are my lived experiences. So, for the purposes of this session, those experiences will all relate to curating while Black and disabled. So, a little bit of story time. About 2.5 years ago, I dreamed up this new idea, this new project called Portraits and Portals. The initiative was designed to pair six disabled disaster survivors of color up with six disabled creatives and artists of color, right? And last year we premiered actually eight different unique and profoundly in tuned pieces of art. And when I say profoundly in tune, I mean profoundly in tune with our people. And I'm really, really proud of that. I wanted to use art to catalyze more creative and nuanced conversations about disasters, race, and disability, right? That's what I do. I do work around those issues. But I wanted to use art to catalyze those conversations in different ways. I wanted to bring those conversations to new spaces. I wanted to create something that could show up and speak volumes even when I couldn't, right? Something that was bold and audacious and beautiful because disasters and emergencies, they already hard enough. They're heavy enough. And so I wanted to infuse a little bit of beauty because I so deeply believe that we can have these conversations from a starting point of recognizing the intrinsic beauties and beautiful pieces of our Black disabled bodies and the people of color, right? The bodies of people of color in general. I believe that we could do this from a place of inherent value, a space that declares and displays the worth of our disabled lives, right? So, Portraits and Portals started with an idea. We had no funding, just an idea and then an intention to center our people on the canvas initially. And of course, we ended up producing works of art that were multimedia in its format. So we had narrative audio stories, we had music that was produced, we had animatic videos that were done, we had poetry that was performed. So there was a lot of different ways that art showed up, including on a canvas with some extraordinary pieces. But I did not request permission. And that's an important point to start off with here. There was no permission requested from anybody because sometimes you just have to create it and tell people it's happening with or without them. Now, if you take this stance now, I do want to tell you, you do have to prepare yourself for most prospective partners or people you talk to say, well, go on ahead without me. Or they'll say something like, we need a little bit more proof that you're worth investing in. We need you to crunch your concept into our grant cycle and all the constraints that come with doing that, right? But know this, your work deserves to live. It deserves to live in the world. And at every stage, you will need to be the one breathing new life into it. Right. So let's define what it means to be a curator real quick. So, a curator is the selector and the interpreter of works of art for an exhibition. That's kind of like the most generalized definition that you could possibly get. Curators are problem solvers, they are the creative compass, right? So when artists or collaborators start to swerve off track and or in different directions, a curator brings everyone back to center, right? Curators are synthesizers of themes or patterns and stories, right? We are practitioners of patience, which is really important because things can get very frustrating when you're trying to get people to adhere to deadlines that everybody agreed to beforehand. But life happens, and we have to be amenable to that. We have to be adaptable and adjust, especially when you are moving with a disabled body, especially when you're moving with the disabled individuals and collaborators. You have to be really mindful of planning as much as you can ahead of time, having soft deadlines, having adjustments, and being able to share that with anyone else around you so that adjustments can be made for everybody's well being, right? A curator is a gatherer of good talent. Yeah. They are pulse checkers. And what I mean by that is that they're always trying to keep their fingers on the pulse of what's relevant in our culture, in our community. What's important, what stories still need to be told, what are new ways to tell these stories? How can they be shared in different spaces or amongst new audiences? Which artists are currently doing cool things, right? Kind of my main goal was to really keep tabs on artists for quite some time, even before Portraits and Portals fully took shape and form. I was really trying to track and kind of to stay in touch and in tune with artists who were already doing exceptional work. Like, oh man, it'd be so great to work with them at some point. I really want to find a project where I could work with them. You want to think about which artists not only are doing cool things, but also which artists are struggling. You know, which artists haven't been chosen to do projects like this? Are you doing a project where you're only trying to get the most popular people so that your project can gain traction? Or are you also trying to get people who are incredibly, extremely talented, but who also don't get the same opportunities as other people, right? So, like, trying to do a good mix of all of that is really important. There's an author by the name of Adrian George who is the individual who is behind one of my favorite texts on curating. The book is called Curating, or the Curator's Handbook. And he says that curators are also producers. They are commissioners, of course, exhibition planners, educators. I say that they are access advocates, which is important. And we just talked about that. But they're also managers and organizers, right? They're writers of wall labels and catalog essays and printed literature and promotional material and website text and social media. We do all of that when curating a project or an exhibition series, right? But there is a very specific and unique connection between curating and disability. And I think that this is really cool. This also comes from the very same book by Adrian George. And I wanted to connect it for us here because I think it's a good point of grounding. Adrian says that the word curator first came into use as meaning manager or guardian in the mid 14th century. The root of the word is in the Latin verb curare, meaning to take care of, Originally, it was used to describe those who were in charge of minors or caring for those with mental health considerations. I had to paraphrase that a little bit because some of the language that was previously used in that description was very outdated and downright offensive. But this makes me immediately think of all of the disabled folks and care workers who quite literally curate care on a daily basis in ways that are thoughtful, that are creative, and ways that are, dare I say, artful as well. And while we're on the topic of care, as a disabled Black curator, I feel a deep duty of care. And I feel that in a couple of ways. I feel a duty of care to our community. So I ask myself when I'm working on a project, who are our people, right? Who does this initiative serve? Who does it spotlight? Who are you going to be accountable to? Who will help hold space for this, right? I feel a duty of care to the artists. I want to make sure they have supply stipends. I want to make sure there's money in the budget to pay them first. I want to make sure that they have creative freedom. I want to give them soft guidance. I think that's really important. And we do that through generative brainstorming sessions, right? When we keep exhibition themes in mind so that, folks are actually producing things that are within the theme, the overarching theme, and we don't end up with something that we can't ultimately include, right? So we're keeping people on the same wavelength throughout. I have a duty of care when there are storytellers involved, right? I want to make sure that people are properly accommodated. I want to make sure that we are mindful of their communication preferences if their whole purpose on the project is to share that story, which is invaluable. I want to make sure they have their interpreters of choice. All of that matters. I also want to make sure that they are paid for their time and their efforts, right? I have a duty of care to the host organization. So Portraits and Portals will ideally go out on tour this year as a pop-up exhibit. And we are connecting with different disability organizations and disaster organizations, really any group that is just interested in hosting it around the country. And we wanted to make sure that we did this in a way that had affordable fee structures built in, that we also incorporated kind of a sliding scale for payment if there were college groups or high school students who could not afford it. We wanted to put the work in uncommon spaces, right? So, certain conferences that never had art exhibition present, or certainly never had an entire series solely devoted to disability, right? So we wanted to create that. We wanted to make space for that. There's also a piece here that I don't think gets talked about enough, which is a duty of care to yourself when doing this work. And it's important for you to write yourself into the work, right? To write yourself into funding proposals, because if you don't, you will not be paid. And you also have to make ends meet. You also have to feed your family. You also have to think about your own um, healthcare, things that cost money, food, everything is so expensive these days. Like all of that really matters. And although these may be projects that are done in art space, that are really projects that are fueled by passion, you also have to make sure that you are paid at the end of the day, right? You want to write yourself into the literature and narratives about your project, but you are the curator. You are the person who created it. You are the person who brought all of it together. That matters. And there's a space for humility. Yes, this is true, but there's also space for honesty. Right. And so often we are erased from our own narratives. We are erased from our own work. It's said that the organization did this, but it's like, there's a black face typically behind that organizational brand that is not being bolstered as much as everything else. Right. So that's really important to think about. So I really want to just encourage people to think about all of these things when you're talking about a duty of care. But there also are some other common curator duties here, which includes things like, being able to liaise with the press, trying to get promotion for your for your project and liaising with the public, having interviews and talks about this. And as disabled folks, we might do this from our beds or from our living rooms, right? We may do this in sweatpants and bonnets. But we still get out there and we find ways to push our work because again, it's not enough just to do it, but it's also a huge piece of this is making sure that people know about it, right? I was very committed to assuring that the work that came out of Portraits and Portals did not just sit in a dusty storeroom closet somewhere, right? Like I wanted to make sure it gets out into the world, and we're exploring a lot of ways to try to make that happen. You're also, of course, in charge of fundraising and development activities. You can have a singular partner, or you can do what is called a slow drip funding strategy. Now, for Portraits and Portals, we were really blessed in being able to collaborate with the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies, which was so great. They provided all of the financing to make sure that our artists were paid, our storytellers were paid, accommodations were taken care of, and that we could also cover the startup costs to get the exhibition ready to go out on tour. So they were exceptional in that way. But there's also ways for people to explore funding in terms of a slow drip funding strategy that I mentioned before. And what I mean by that is really you think about church back in the day, they used to, your tithes and your offerings. That's not even back in the day. Churches are definitely still asking for that now. But you take 10% of your earnings and you kind of devote it to the church. And right now, though, I apply that to my work. And so funding that I get from other projects and other work that I am doing, if I'm a part of a research initiative or if I've been brought on to facilitate a project or if I've been brought on to coordinate the accessibility components for a large gathering, I'll use funds from that, take a small percentage of that and make sure that I devote it to some of these passion projects of mine and passion projects of Seated Ground, right? My firm. And that is slow. It is slow going, because you're only taking, a bit of what you've earned from this one branch to kind of feed into this other branch. And but it is possible. It is possible. And as folks with disabilities, we know the value, we know the possibility and being able to do things slow. We know the power and being able to do things slowly. And it may be a bit tedious and it's certainly time consuming, but it is worth it if we are able to get things done, especially when people quite frankly tell us no, or that they are disinterested or that they don't see the reason, they don't see why it's remarkable. They don't think that you're ready. And so we have to tell ourselves a new story. We have to write a new narrative around that. And sometimes that means we just go a little bit slower, but we get it done on our own terms. And I have personally had to do this. We put out, my firm, City Ground, we put out the Disaster Justice Guidebook for people of color with disabilities back in 2024. And we lost most of the funding for that project. Like it got cut halfway through. And it's because one of our collaborators had lost their funding. And so they then could not contribute the money that they had committed to us. And so, with that being said, we ended up having to do that slow drip funding strategy. And I just paid people little by little, from what I could. And it took a couple of months longer than I initially anticipated, but we got that guidebook out. And it is one of the most popular resources that we've ever done. And it is one of the things that I am perhaps the most proud of, which is beautiful. We did the same thing with imprints. And Imprints is a disaster justice themed series of coloring pages, activity pages, and journal pages. And we really did this as an accompaniment to the guidebook because the guidebook is text heavy, right? We have audio companions there, but it's pretty text heavy. And so we wanted to find a way to bring people into planning and preparing around disasters in ways that were more interactive, in ways that met people where they were, in ways that were more visual. And again, centering disabled folks on the page. So coloring pages were a part of this, journal activities are a part of this, activity pages are a part of this. And that was the way that we produced imprints. And so it's another project that I love so much, working with all disabled artists on that project. And so, again, commissioning them to do the work, providing them with the full scale concept of what images I wanted to see, what type of activities I wanted them to create and to draw up, and they just hit it out of the park. Imprints is such a fun, amazing series, but again, still allows people to deal with some of the tangible material concerns around what happens to us, what can we plan for, what should we be thinking about as it relates to disaster. So I love that. I love that project. It's also really important to think about this work in connection to educational outreach, you know? So, doing offerings and gatherings like this is really, really cool. We could talk to people about your process, and how they can also replicate this and do this in whatever ways feel good to them. But also reaching out to the college circuits, right? Talking to college students about this, but also high schools. You know, when you're curating and, you know, putting your work out and connecting with high school students is a huge deal, as well as middle school. Sometimes a lot of groups will only focus on college students, but it's really important, I think. And I'm going to try to make a real concerted effort to do this in the future, but to really try to get at more high school and middle school students. So if y'all know some folks who are interested in art, some schools or some districts who are interested in some of these series that we got going on, I'll be more than happy to talk to these schools about them, because I think it's really important to start young. But as we talk about the youth, we must also talk about the folks who are a little bit older amongst us and adults, right? So how are we pushing our work to public spaces for adult learning? Are we giving virtual talks? Are we connecting with informal groups like meetup groups, or just collective of friends or community members? Are we talking to them? Are we connecting with libraries, right? Continuing education programs? All of that is really important, right? But even with saying all of this, I have to be really, really frank and tell you that there's sometimes pain within the paint. Right? When talking about these art initiatives, sometimes there's pain in that. And what I mean when I say that is that it's really important for you to use every messed up thing that has happened to you professionally to make sure that circumstances are measurably and meaningfully better for the projects and the people and exhibitions that you curate moving forward. I have dealt with all sorts of funding fuckery, what I call it. I have had people work with me and be in partnership with me the entire way through, and end the partnership, terminate the partnership a day before the event so that they could not pay me. Right? I have dealt with the fuckery. I have dealt with ownership issues in terms of people thinking that they own everything that you do and that you have worked on, and having to really fight to make sure that that is not the case. And again, this just makes me better in how I treat everybody else, right? Like I have vowed to myself, this is a personal devotion, a personal praxis for me to never repeat the type of hell people have personally put and professionally put me through, right? And so I'm accountable. I try to hold myself to account in that regard. I think about this in terms of equity versus extraction, right? So assuring that artists know that they retain their copyright for their work, although we're commissioning the pieces, making sure that storytellers understand that they can always use their stories and their contributions. You would think that this is just standard and that everybody should know this. Not true. I have literally had to work with organizations and tell them, and different projects that I've worked on over the years, to take out the clauses in the contracts that say that everything from that project is the sole ownership of that organization, including the stories, the images, the ideas. And I'm like, you don't own somebody's story. Nah, you're gonna have to take that out. That is not how this is going to go. Change it. And they're like, oh my God, I didn't know it was there. I'm like, yes, because, you know, an attorney put that in and it's a standard, you know, boilerplate language. But if you're claiming to move with the spirit of equity, this shit don't work. You're gonna have to change it, you know? So working in this way can be perceived as radical, or that, hey, you guys are trying to subvert the system. But I think it is also the most transparent and straightforward way of moving, right? And you definitely want to do this from a place of plain language so that everybody understands what's actually happening, and that's important so that people have informed consent when they are connecting and collaborating with you. They know exactly what's happening, when, how, where, and that may mean you take more time to work with folks. Listen, I had 8 different pairs because we initially started with 6, but the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies were wonderfully able to find a little bit of additional funding. So we actually had 8 pairs in total. And so 8 different pieces of art came out of Portraits and Portals. And I sat through each of those pairs, had 3 different meetings, the introduction meeting, a midpoint meeting where the artists would tell the storytellers what they were getting ready to do, and where they were, status update. And we wanted to do that so that we didn't get all the way to the end of the initiative. And then the storyteller's been like, hey, you got everything wrong. And so we wanted to have a midway check-in, and then of course a final reveal meeting, where the artist shared with the storytellers what came out of it, what the art was, revealed the art, premiered the art directly to the storyteller one-on-one. But in doing that, we had to sit through, I had to sit, and I was present in all of those meetings, right? To make sure that everybody felt comfortable, everyone consented, everyone kind of had a consensus the whole way through. And that's just, it's really important. And sometimes you'll get disagreements. Sometimes people won't be fully happy or satisfied with the end product, and that happens. You have to be kind of ready for that, but you do try to do the very best that you can, and to make sure at the very least people are comfortable enough to continue at their own volition, and that's really, really important. So I will close though with these words about artistry from Toni Morrison. I'm giving ancestor Toni Morrison the final words here on today. Toni Morrison says this: I recalled the artists who have done their work in gulags, prison cells, hospital beds, who did their work while hounded, exiled, reviled, pilloried. This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There is no time for despair. No place for self pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. That is how civilizations heal. I know the world is bruised and bleeding, and though it is important not to ignore its pain, it's also critical to refuse to succumb to its malevolence. Like failure, chaos contains information that can lead to knowledge, even wisdom, like art. Thank y'all so much. Y'all take care.